every successful person got there by going through tough times. Success is a hard-ass teacher who likes to knock you around along that journey. You know, it takes real guts to not give up and keep going. We'll hear stories about failures and how these leaders flip the script to create success. I'm John Schultz. Join me and let's discover how success is never really overnight. So welcome to the John Schultz podcast, and I have an amazing guest today. You know, I say that every time, but like this may be amazing squared. It's that good, and I'm so excited for this podcast. We have Daniel Dart. He is the founder of Rock Yard Ventures, which is an unbelievable new venture fund, which he created. And he was involved also in music. He founded DEC Artists. He represented Seal, not only on a book, but a film, managed many people. And that sort of went towards a different direction. And he did social justice programming for clients like the Jeff Bezos, actually the Bezos Family Foundation, which is run by Jeff Bezos' parents. Worked on campaigns for the Obama White House and, you know, many more, which we're going to hear about. But just a little preamble. Welcome to the podcast.
Dude, thank you for having me. I'm super excited
terrific.
to be here.
All right, so we always start way back. You know, so my first question to you is, where did you grow up, and how would you describe yourself as a young man?
Yeah. No, I love that. So I grew up in California, and I say California just because I stopped living with my parents and kind of went into placements full time at 13. And before that, I lived in the Bay Area, and then after that, I lived in like Southern California and around. So I kind of just say California in general. But what I would say is like my dad works in the building material space. That's where in lumberyard and construction, that's where the name of the Rock Yard came from. Is, you know, growing up, he had this place in his business that he ran called the Rock Yard that sold building materials and stuff like that. And even though my childhood was super tumultuous and all that stuff, and there was many years when me and my dad probably weren't the best of friends, I still love my parents so much. And this is kind of my way of honoring them and kind of carrying on their legacy. And just to kind of note on that, it's as I go through, and we'll talk about it in the story of going to prison and being homeless and all of these things, and having to kind of seek out the opportunity for people to give me second chances. That's one of the things where now, like, me and my dad and mom are best friends. And it's like, yeah, there's frustration about stuff that happened 30 years ago, but like it was 30 years ago. So sometimes I think we just got to get over it. And
yeah. So again, it's amazing how we grow. But, you know, we had to go through it. So you went through it, right? So, you know, share what you want, but, you know, what was the tough moments growing up? Like what enabled you to go in the direction that you did, and how did that sort of unfold?
I think it kind of ties into the thing you said a minute ago about just kind of growing. I think the biggest thing was just myself growing and getting a little more mature and getting wisdom. And then also like realizing that a lot of things they're not life or death. Someone said to me recently, they're like, "Oh, you seem like a risk taker." And I'm like, I don't think so, actually. And they're like, "What do you mean?" And I'm like, to me, like a risk is something where I might end up dead. Like, it's like, let me throw out a parachute and then you jump out and try and catch it. Like, that's a risk, you know? But something where I might fail or something where I might kind of eat crap or something, that's not a risk. Like, failure's not bad. And so I think when I kind of look at that and just the journey of the failures, I sometimes I'm just like, I'm so grateful for it. Even later when we talk about being in prison, there was times where I'm like, you know, prison sucks, but like, you know, it could be worse, you know?
Right. Well, you know, unfortunately, no matter what happens to us, we got to get through it, right? I mean, if you watch all these motivational videos that we all watch, it's, you know, it's always someone's toughest moment, right? It's always, you can go two directions, you pick it, but then you have to get through that moment that you picked, which is difficult. Yeah. And I guess because, you went through probably more challenging situations than the normal person would have to ever deal with. You know, psychologically, how do you do it? I mean, how do you get through it? And because you can literally just say and have no hope. I think the only way we live through life is having hope. I have
Yeah.
a friend that wrote a book called Learn Hopefulness, and it's a bestseller. And it's all about like that moment where you have that little hope to go forward. How'd you
Yeah.
get through it? Why don't you just give a little background on, what happened, and then we could talk
Sure.
about how you came out of it.
Yeah. So I think it's very nonlinear. It feels nonlinear, even though explaining it's linear. So growing up, there was just a lot of, I would say, volatility. And I think I was super immature. I was a kid. I think my parents sometimes didn't know how to deal with it and vice versa. And it led to just tumultuous times, a factor of 10. I stopped living with my parents around 13, 14, and went into placements. And looking back, it wasn't so bad, honestly. Like, I got to be on my own. I got to kind of get out and run a bit. Um, I think the problem is growing up, I never really had any roots. And they say, like, in order for a flower to bloom, it must have roots. And so there was a period of time, I think from really birth all the way to like my mid 20s, where I didn't feel like I really belonged anywhere. Um, but there were certain things that I think we talked about, finding hopefulness and all of those things. There were certain qualities and aspects that I think my parents really instilled in me that I still carry, which is why they're kind of my heroes. And like one thing my dad really instilled with me is this work ethic where like, hey, if you want to be an astronaut, if you work hard enough, like you could figure it out. So like I have this kind of innate feeling that even today, if I wanted to be an astronaut, like there was a way. And there were certain things that he would say to me about that I kind of carried that later when I went to London School of Economics. No one had ever been to the program in grad school without an undergrad or any of that. And so like my first thing was like, okay, well, I'll be the first. And the same thing at MIT of being the first formerly incarcerated guy. It was kind of all of these things that my dad instilled with me, that kind of work ethic. Um, and so even where times were really bad, he kind of built in a sense of grit. And then alongside that, my mom always, and she must have said this to me literally a million times in my life, that like this too shall pass, right? Like this too shall pass. And even growing up, and I think when things were really hard, it wasn't always like, hey, it's really hard for you. It was kind of like we're really hard for us. And like this too shall pass. Like we'll find our way through. And so a lot of those different things, I think like having that as kind of a core belief system, I always kind of say, and I've talked to you a little bit about my fund. Like what I try to say all the time is I want to be the tortoise in a world of hares, right? Like where I'm at right now is not really as important as it sounds because like this is not the finish line, right? Like I'm still in the game. So maybe if I'm a little bit farther behind, maybe if it's taken me a little bit longer, like that's okay. And so I always try to say like, hey, I'm a tortoise in a world of hares. And I've felt that way ever since I was a kid. Like I will outlast you. And I think like type of that resilience, it allows you to kind of push through the hard times because you don't think they're permanent.
Well, you had, hard times is an understatement on what you ended up having going through. And I agree. I feel like, okay, being a tortoise is better because when it's all over, it's over. Like
Yeah.
the journey is the only thing. If we could just get that in our brain, that all the fun is the journey, because at the end, it's over.
Yeah.
Like we're all on
Yeah.
this planet for a finite time.
Yeah, and it's weird because I kind of grew in, in the last few years recently into the feeling I would hear people growing up saying like I have no regrets and I'm so grateful for this. And like up until my mid 30s, I'd be like, dude, that's crazy. Like just because you never had really bad shit happen, like I have a ton of regrets, you know? Um, and it's weird, as I got to a certain age, I kind of started to look at it differently because when I say I was homeless, it wasn't like I slept on a buddy's couch. It was like, yo, like I literally slept on the street for years. There was like whole entire calendar years where I slept behind a stairwell and I went to food banks and I would go to College Avenue Baptist Church Monday through Friday from 6 to 9 a.m. and get my coffee and free day-old donuts. Like, I went through all of those things, and now it's built in this sense of kind of radical empathy, and that's the great thing is like I can kind of tread anywhere. And I think that now it's actually a superpower, right? And along the way, one of the things that I thought was very interesting is I had a friend named Shaw Jackson that I knew when I was like 18. And I saw him when I was in my mid-20s and I was doing much better. And he had known me when I was homeless because every once in a while we would cross paths. And I saw him and I'm in my mid-20s. I'm telling him like, yo, man, I'm doing so much better, da-da-da. And he kind of blew it off. He was like, oh, yeah, I knew you would. And I was surprised. I said, wow, what? You're not surprised? He goes, no, man, I knew you would make it. So I'm not surprised. And it's weird because at the time, I didn't even know that I would make it, right? So I'm like, how did you know? And he goes, man, even when your life was horrible, I remember your life was so jacked, you still had a smile on your face. And I knew that one day it was going to work out. Like, I just knew it. I'm like, it's going to work out for this guy. Because he's like, man, your life was so bad. Like, if my life was your life, I'd run into traffic. But, like, you would still be smiling. And I knew it was just a matter of time before you caught a break. And you kind of did that. And I kind of look at it now, and we'll fast forward even now to building the fund. I have this theory that I call my Michelangelo theory. So, like, I love to read. I read vociferously, like all the time. And when I was reading the history of Michelangelo, one of the world's greatest artists, he had 3 patrons his whole life, 2 popes and the de Medici. And now I know they're big patrons, but I think the thing is, especially building it, like, I don't need 1 million people to have my back. I just need to find that right cohort of believers, and they can really ride with me my whole life. And so now as I'm looking, hey, where am I going to move? It's like, don't try to convince the skeptics, just find your believers. And that's kind of how I do it.
So I love that. And I'll tell you why. I've done enough of these podcasts now, and there's all these really cool themes, no matter where anyone came from. And everyone has this story of there was, for some reason, always someone there that made someone feel strong enough to actually get to the next thing. It could have been like someone brought them over into a new job, or someone said they could do it. These motivational quotes and things that are just on Instagram, those are good, but it's not the same when you have that little circle of people that make you feel that you can do it, right? Just like our parents or whoever that was in our younger lives that did that. So in that question, knowing that you were homeless and, this guy said it after, he didn't say it before, and that you did have your stints in prison that you had to deal with. Where did you find it there? Because that's not a normal place for that to be.
So that's an interesting thing. So, to kind of give a little linear thing. So grew up in California, into placements at 13, homeless 18 to 21, end up starting a rock band, and the rock band gets signed. Next thing you know, we have a gold record and we do it. I bring that up because there was this song, one of our first songs that kind of took off was called Me and You. And it's a story of me talking to someone kind of in the journey from homelessness to the band. And it's weird, a fan said, who's the person? Who's the Me and You? And I said, you got to decide. It's up to you. But the truth is that Me and You is me talking to myself. And so a lot of times, like, I do talk to myself. I'll be like, yo, Daniel, you got this, bro. And I say that like, where like, I really, really, really believe like you have to be your own best friend. And so growing up, I would tell myself, I would look in the mirror and give those affirmations. I said, bro, you got this. Like, you got this. Like, we're going to get through it. You and me. Right. And not like in a inner voices type of thing, but just kind of that thing where it's like having that self-compassion and doing that. And so a lot of times, like if I'm going into a big pitch meeting or something, I'll just say the same thing. I'll be like, Daniel, you got this, bro. Like, like I believe in you, man. I love you, man. And we're going to do it. And whether we win or lose, like I'm still going to love you and we're going to try tomorrow. And it's weird because upon reflection, it's always been that way. And sometimes to kind of add to that, the other day I'm on a road show. Right now I'm in Philly. I was heading to the airport at like 4 a.m. And I was just like talking to myself and just like thinking, I'm like, man, I'm just so grateful. And I'm like, bro, like this journey is amazing, you know? And I even like yelled it in my car by myself driving to the airport at 4 in the morning. Like, and I think the overarching thing of that is to how do you build in those moments of awe where it's like, you're just like, wow, this is amazing. And then sometimes like I'll pitch these big organizations, like super famous. And whether they invest or not, just the fact that I'm in the room pitching them, like this is crazy, bro. Like I'm like, yo, like we're sitting here in a boardroom on like the 100th story in New York, like, and so it's like I kind of remember that journey of who I am and where I've come from, and really try to live with that. I don't want to let it go, you know. And so a lot of times, like I think like you have to be your own biggest advocate, not in a negative way where it's like, yo, I deserve this, or like you owe me, but your biggest advocate where you're like, yo, I really love the person I am, and I think I'm special, and I think I could do this, and just don't give up. You know, we say, don't leave 5 minutes before the miracle happens.
I love me and you. You know, everyone says you have to love yourself first. Everyone says you got to save yourself first on the plane with the mask before you can save someone else. And it's also true, but the key is actually believing it. And I guess because of what you went through, you were forced and you had no other choice, right? Because there was no one else there that actually maybe you felt you could grab onto, at least at the beginning.
Yeah. I mean, I have like a few different like life ethos things. One of them is like I will always show up, like I won't forfeit, right? So it's like I think there was certain times in life, and I actually built this when I was like 18. So I ended up getting arrested, I think at 18 for a fake ID or something. And I spent a few nights in jail because I never went to court. And it's weird. So when I went back to court, I would never, and at this time I was getting arrested a lot. So like when you get arrested, you want them to release you on OR. If you're a flight risk or you never show up, they never release you. And it was weird because I really brought that on myself, you know, and I made a conscious decision then at age 18 that like no matter how afraid I am or how uncomfortable I am, like I'm always going to show up. Like you may beat me, but like I'm not going to beat myself. Right. And so that's a conscious thing. Like, no matter how scared I am, no matter how afraid I am. And I'll tell you what, man, I'm afraid a lot. It's not like I'm like this big ball of courage. I'll give a story in a sec, but that's like one of my big life ethos. On that story, I was in prison. So I'm in prison. Now at 30, I end up getting arrested. I almost face life in prison. I end up doing a little over 3 years before it gets overturned on appeal. In this time, I've been in this one prison yard for about a year and a half, and they're about to move me. And when you move prisons, it's really sketchy because you don't know where you're going to land. You don't know the dynamics or the politics or the volatility. I was at one prison where it got overtaken by prisoners for like 5 days, and the National Guard had to come fight it back. Right. So it's like it can get really, really, really volatile. And I'm there, and one of my buddies at the time, this guy who was serving life, comes up to me and he goes, how you feeling, man? You feeling good? And I'm in prison, right? So, yeah, I'm good. He goes, you scared? I said, no, I'm good. I'm good. But like in my head, I was like, yeah, And this dude, his nickname was Insane. And he was there, like I said, serving a life sentence. And he was truly insane. Like he had killed a few people. And I don't try to minimize that, but like just to tell you, like this dude was scary. And it was weird. And he goes, it's okay to be afraid, man. I get afraid a lot. It kind of blew my mind, man. And because this was like one of the toughest dudes in the whole prison. And I remember thinking like, what? You get afraid? And he goes, oh, yeah, man. The only people that don't get afraid are people that are totally full of shit and they're lying to you, or they're completely psychotic. And in my head, I thought Insane was one of the completely psychotic dudes, right? But he was like, yeah, man, I get afraid too. And we had this conversation, and it was really enlightening, right? Because like if you were to ask me who's the toughest, craziest dude that you've ever met, I would tell you Insane, right? Joseph Bell. And now he's telling me that he gets scared too, right? And it's kind of one of those things where it's like, I'm just going to show up, you know, and I think that's a big thing in life. And then on the caveat on that, which is another song for my band, oddly enough, is never give up. And that kind of goes to that forfeit thing, right? Like I'm just, no matter what, I'm always going to try, right? So it's like I'm going to show up always, and I'm always going to try. And I say that now with my fiance often. I'm like, hey, what's our family rule, right? Like we always show up and we always try. So like it may not work, but we're going to try, you know. And at the end of the day, did we give it all we have? And I kind of approach that. And as I approach that thing, and you kind of build it into your ethos, shit works out, you know. We haven't met or hung. One of the things that as we become better friends, you'll hear me talk about a lot. I'm like, you know, standing humans, right? Whether they're Neanderthals or Homo erectus or Homo sapiens, been around for 1,000,000 years, right? For like 985,000 of that, we were fighting tigers and shit. You know, it's like,
Yeah.
so like me having trouble raising LP capital, yo, it's not that big of a deal, right? And so it's like, yo, when I put this into context and it's like, hey, I'm going to outlast the next guy, I think that's there. And I also think that ethos being a venture now, like when I work with startup founders and stuff like that, being able to bring that in an authentic way is also a superpower. Like, yo, let's keep things in context. Is this really a crisis where we need to flip out? No. Let's just figure it out. You know?
My saying's always been like, it'll happen when it's supposed to,
Yeah.
and just keep flowing through it until it does. And it's never what we think, right? It's sort of what we think, but like it's never really what we think, and we're mostly wrong until we're right, right? So
Yeah.
you got to keep showing up. So I love that. I love how you were able to use your creative spirit with the songs to address it all. And like, let's get into that. So like, you know, myth of overnight success, you had a band and it became very successful quickly, right? Like, so
Yeah.
that's not a normal thing. And how did that happen? And, you know, I guess after that, you had some other things you had to get through. You know, tell us a little bit about that story.
Yeah, so I was, homeless, 18 to 21, off the streets. I ended up getting a little studio apartment, not a studio apartment, just a room with 4 people. We're living in it. A big gang war erupts. And this is what, maybe 2001 or something. And at this time of my life, I'm carrying a gun, and things are very, very volatile and just really violent and dangerous. I end up getting arrested on a gun charge, but because I had also not checked it on parole for another thing, I'm back to jail. So I go back to jail. I'm there for a few months. I get this judge that instead of giving me 10 years, gives me the opportunity to go into a reentry program for 6 months. He says, hey, if you want to do this, you have to live there and all of that. And so it's like a state-run facility, but it's better than prison. So I end up going there, and I call this kind of my Goodwill Hunting moment. I ended up getting this social worker named Les Lazarus, right, who's like one of my first kind of Sherpas or Eskimos.
Great movie, by the way. Great movie, right?
Well, I mean, that's one of the reasons I chose MIT, man. Because growing up, I'm like, yo, that could have been me, man.
Yep.
And so I meet Les, and I'm in this program, and he's like, yo, what do you want to do with your life? And at the time, I had no idea. I'm like, I have no clue, right? And he goes, well, if I was a genie and you could be anything, what would you be? And I was like, yo, man, I would be a rock star. He goes, then, man, start a band. Like, find something you're passionate about, have fun. And so I ended up starting this band, and the band was called Time Again. The name, I always joke, if I'd known it was going to be successful, I'd pick a different name. But the name was like, yo, here we go. We're starting again, time again. Because, like, I'd had all these false starts, right? And the first song we ever wrote was called Never Give Up, right? And so I ended up writing this song, and it ends up taking off on the radio, right? Next thing you know, it's on the radio. We're doing this whole thing. But again, just charging into it, right? I'm like this, just running and punching and all this. Our first show was 3 songs, and they tried to cut us off after the second one, But what happened is I would flyer, and I flyer at work ethic, right? So I would pass out like 5,000 flyers for our second show, 5,000 flyers for our third show. By the fourth show, people at different venues and promoters like had seen me out so much, handing them out one by one. They'd be like, "Hey, how about you play at the Whiskey? We'll pay you $1,000. We'll print the flyers for you, and it'll be like 10 shows, and yours can be one of them, because we know that the flyers will get handed out." So I'm doing that and like kind of doing it. It's been months. Now we played all over LA, and I get a call, and the band, the Circle Jerks, legendary punk band from the guy who founded Black Flag, was like, "Hey, do you want to come open for us on tour?" Right. And at this time, we only had like 5 originals, right? So we had to play like 8 songs. 3 of them were covers. And like, we didn't have a record out or nothing. And it was weird. I'm talking to Keith, and I go, "Keith, man," Keith Morris, their singer. I said, "How did you pick us?" And he goes, "Oh, man, there was this girl that I know. We were talking who should open. And she goes, "Well, I've never heard them play, but I see the singer for Time Again passing out flyers 7 nights a week. Somebody's got to give that kid a break." So to this day, I don't know who that girl was, right? But he went onto our MySpace at the time and looked us up, and he noticed that we wrote back to every comment someone left. And he goes, "Man, I admire that." Right. And I go, "I'm going to give this kid a break." So it was kind of all these different things that happened of the
It's like
universe.
synchronicity. It's like doing the right thing,
Yeah.
believing in yourself. You said it, loving yourself enabled this thing to open up, and we never really know how it happens, except it did.
Yeah. And I looked at music and shows. I was like, man, there's 12 million people in LA. If I pass out enough flyers, I got to be able to get 100 of them to come. You know what I'm saying? Like, even if they come just because they like me. And so that was my thing. It was like a numbers game. And I used to always tell people in music, I would say, man, you look at Garth Brooks, huge. You look at Metallica, huge. You look at Beyonce, huge. You look at all these people. Most people who own a Beyonce record probably don't own a Garth Brooks record, probably don't own a Metallica record. So it's like, the key is you need to find your audience.
Yeah.
Right? And so, like, as I was building my band, I was like, yo, I'm going to work so hard to find my audience, to find my niche. And that's kind of how I've moved, right? Like, find those believers. And so I was just like, hey, if I outwork these people and I hand out 1 million flyers and I shake 1 million hands, I'm going to get 100 of them to come to the show. And that worked. Next thing you know, we got the record deal. It took off, and things started to change.
All right. So you had this like defining moment where you were at some place for long enough to have whatever hopefulness, mentoring you got something clicked, right? Yeah. And then, unbeknownst to no one, even you get this sort of opportunity, like synchronicity opportunity, which is terrific. It's going. Yeah. What happened?
So that it's going, and one of the reasons it went too is that talking about it is around that time, around 20, when I started to build that ethos of always try and always work hard. I was in that program, and I was ended up talking to my dad, and my dad said something to me that I'll always remember. And he goes, "Man, for once in your life, why don't you try?" He's like, "You always do just enough to get by." And he goes, "You're so smart." He's like, "If you ever tried something 100%, I wonder what would happen." And it kind of goes into that formative years of maturing, because it was true, right? And so it hit me so profoundly. And so as I kind of went to launch Time Again, that's when I really was like, yo, man, I'm going to put everything into this and let the chips fall where they may. And things really changed, right? So I did the band. That was great. Still a lot of problems, tumultuous life, right? Because I didn't have what I would say is the emotional maturity to manage different things or manage relationships. I hadn't done like the quote unquote work.
Was it why? Because you didn't feel work. Like, I know we just discussed before. You gotta love yourself. Like, what was stopping you?
I was dating this girl for a long time, and I just don't know. I think it's like I had never really understood what a good relationship would look like, or what those things, and it's not, again, a judgment on people I was around, right? It's all sorts of different things, the confluence of, right? But I just didn't know how to do it, right? And the thing about it, at that time, I don't even know if I was mature enough to ask people or to take guidance, or like, even if you were to help me at that time, I don't know if I was mature enough to hear your wisdom.
Got
right?
It. Yeah.
And
Makes
so
sense.
things go. Next thing, they go south, end up breaking up with that girl, kind of end up start drinking again. So I had stopped drinking. Next thing you know, I'm back in the old neighborhood with the fellas, hanging out, and boom, end up getting arrested, right? With a bunch of my people I kind of grown up with and buddies. Next thing you know, I get arrested for like what? And it was like 25 different felony charges. And they're like, yo, you're going to prison for life. Like, you're done, bro. And I remember at the time, it didn't feel real. Like, I remember being like, what? This can't happen. Because I am very hopeful, I think, just by genetics, right? So, like, you're
Yeah.
there and you can't wrap your head around it. And, at first I thought there's no way I'm going to go to prison, right? This is going to work out. I trust the system, all these things. Then that wasn't the case. I ended up getting, initially 180 years they offered me. Then they offered me 18. Then they offered me 11 and finally sentenced me to 7 years. So I was going to do probably about 5.5. I ended up going to prison, file my appeal. And oddly enough, I say this a lot, going to prison, I can make a strong argument that it's the best thing that ever happened to me. I think like it put things in a perspective in a sense where it was like, hey, in many aspects, right? I already knew this, but now it's forcefully. I am on my own, man. Whether I sink or swim, it's up to me. And like what we say in prison, like these dudes are giving out football numbers. And what I mean by that, like, a jersey, like 80, 82, right? Like this is real serious. And once you kind of get sucked into the system, I'm like, yo, man, like, yeah, maybe I'm only going to do 5 years, 7 years here, but like I mess up again, that's a wrap. I was super blessed and fortunate. It got overturned in around little over 3 years. I got out. And once I got out, again, I was just like, yo, no matter what, like, I don't care if I sleep in the closet or I don't care if I'm homeless again. Like, I'm never, ever, ever going to put myself back in a position where I go to prison. And in that same thought process, it kind of changed everything because, like, who you are is who you are, right? Like, who you with, right? So, like, all of those things, if I'm spending my time with these people, even if I'm not real close with them, guilty by association. And so like it really kind of reinforced that like your network is who you are. And so what's hard about that is I didn't have any built-in positive networks, right? But my goal then was like, hey, where do positive people that I admire and respect, where do they hang out? And how can I just really just be their friend, right? Like I even say now today, life's gotten much better, but like a great life for me is like, hey, me and my fiance have a nice little apartment we enjoy living in. We have cars we like driving, and I can get anything I want at the grocery store at any time. Like I don't have to worry about like, oh, this is a $16 steak. I gotta save this for a special occasion. And and I think because like all of the other stuff, I just have so much fun in the process. And so as I got out of prison and I went to rebuild my life, it really radically changed everything in how the world I saw it, right? Where I was just like, hey, and so even some of my friends now that I grew up with, they hit me up, hey man, we want to catch up. And I'll let them know. I'll be like, oh, I'm gonna be at this nonprofit volunteer day. Like come down and serve food or something. And rarely do they ever show up. They'll be like, it's like if you want to hang out, I'll tell them if you want to hang out on the block, that's a pass, bro. I can't do that. Those years are over for me. You know?
Good for you.
Um,
It's so interesting because I don't know if you're sabotaging yourself because you still didn't get to that belief moment where it could just keep going and now you're out again. And when did you start getting into this second chance these campaigns? Like, because
yeah,
I was reading about you and I feel like once you got there
yeah,
and you were giving to the world in a way that everyone can experience and learn,
yeah,
and you were giving, not taking, right? You were giving. It wasn't like you had a band and you were, and
yeah,
even when you were doing the flyers, you were giving. It's like,
yeah,
notice that, right? Every time you give,
yeah,
something good happens.
yeah.
So how did that happen with the DEC?
So interesting. So the thing about the band that was interesting is even though I had a lot of success, I never really loved it. Right? It was something that I knew how to do, and then like the analogy I would say is like I think if you had asked Michael Jordan, he would have much rather been a baseball player or a golfer, but he was just so great at basketball. And so the reason I think I fell off in the band thing is it was never my purpose. It was never my thing. Like it was always like it felt like, this is not a natural. I'm putting all this work for something really don't want to be. I don't like the community and all this. What I ended up getting out, the thing that really blew my mind is when I was in prison, and sometimes you'll hear the term, I don't know if you've heard of school to prison pipeline, right? I didn't really know what that was. I had heard it. I didn't, and I heard the concept. But every prison I was at, I think there was like 4 or 5 at the time, I would get somewhere and I'd know 20 or 30 dudes on the yard. And that's surprising in California, a state of 30 million people, to go to a prison of 3,000 people and 30 of them, right? And so what I kind of realized was like, hey, in many aspects, like the deck is rigged against us, man. The weird thing is because the band, I kind of broke that thing. Like it launched me into a different direction where it's like, if I had not had that band, I would have been one of these dudes the whole time.
Right.
Right. And I think the thing about it is now all of a sudden I have this knowledge and I have this insight. So I kind of feel like I have a moral obligation to try and change it, And the thing about it, because the band, I have this big network. So I end up getting into management. My first job out of prison for the first few months, I was changing sheets at Airbnbs. I had to make some money, so I was a maid, right? Second job is I ended up working on the management team for Weezer, the band. I handled Brian, the guy with long hair who played guitar. And something popped up, and I just asked Brian. I said, Brian, man, this is important to me. Would you do a PSA on this? Brian's like, absolutely, I'd love to. And so I asked other people, and what I have found is kind of this like God or universe or synchronicity moment is, hey, now I'm in a position where I have this network from my band days and the entertainment days. I could call these guys up and say, hey, guys, I want to work on this. Can you do it? And all of a sudden, man, like it felt like I really found my footing. You know what I mean? Where I was like, like you had said, that flow state, right? Where all of a sudden, like, man, like this is like, it's it. And so as I kind of moved into that, and so I started managing and I worked with all these big artists. Deck artists became Deck projects because I went from managing artists to managing these social campaigns, usually on behalf of artists. So like Tom Clicchio from Top Chef, I did like his anti-hunger stuff. And Mark Duplass from like The League and The Morning Show, I did wounded veteran stuff. But like, I was like, how do we merge culture and corporate and all of these different things? And so it's like I was really in it. So next thing you know, I kind of shifted. I'm loving it. It's awesome. I'm working with Obama. I'm working with the Bezos Family Foundation. I'm working with ACLU, Wounded Warrior Project, Save the Children. I end up meeting another one of my Sherpas, this dude named Gunther Schoenlinter, right? And I think you may have read about him a little bit, but he was the executive director at the board of the World Bank. Again, synchronicity. I end up meeting him at someone's going away, like birthday party thing.
While doing good.
While doing good.
While giving.
Yeah.
Like that's when you meet people. Like
100%.
it's a string. It's a string,
man. And so I end up as I'm kind of working on these things, I'm like, man, what's big? Like, what can I really sink my teeth into? What can I really do? What are some global issues? And what I would say is along the way, I found what my life kind of purpose is, right? Like, so my life issue, when you ask me, like, what matters most to me from an issue perspective is economic and upward mobility. The ability to go up in life, meaning like where you're born does not dictate where you end. And so along this path, I end up starting working in North Africa, the Middle East, Sub-Saharan Africa, primarily on campaigns that had to do with economic health, right? That's when I learned about entrepreneurship and like startup culture. Up until then, I didn't know. If you would ask me, hey, what's a startup? I kind of knew, but not really. And this is like 2016, 2017 now, right? So I'm over in the Middle East. I'm working on these campaigns. And I realized like, okay, I got to figure out, like, I'm working on these campaigns on awesome stuff. And I touched on like a goat breeding project to produce more milk for women who are childbearing, for better nutrition. in the Sahara Desert, an anti-child marriage campaign, a small and micro enterprise loan thing. And what I found out is like, no matter how much I do with bringing together culture, bringing together campaigns, if there's not a capital allocation perspective in this, there's no sustainability. So at this point, I'm like, I need to figure out how to move capital. And so I initially started watching like YouTube videos on economics and all this stuff. And they have like the free classes at Harvard and
Yeah.
MIT.
Yeah.
So I would just sign up and take the free classes. And it's great because with the classes, you can even get credit. If you submit your tax return and it's like lower than this, you get credit. So I would submit it and do this stuff. And you could do it from anywhere in the world. So you could be in Malaysia and get these classes for free. And so I did that. Then I found out about Google Scholar, which is like the Google website. If you type in Google Scholar for free academic papers. So like now I'm learning about microeconomics. I'm reading these academic papers. I'm like, yo, man, I'm going to do my own academic paper, right? So like I teach myself how to do like these Bayesian methods and research methods and all this stuff online. And I start to write this paper and do interviews and data collection and like pitch it to different academic conferences. The thing about academic conferences, a lot of times they say just no, but sometimes I'd say 30%. If they say no, they'll give you notes. So like I would send it and you write it back, be like, hey, this isn't a fit because of X, Y, and Z.
Right. They give you critique, which is good. Yeah.
Critique. So then I would go through those critiques and I would upload it. And then sometimes I'd email back the professor, all that. One of the professors I started going back and forth with, which is funny, was a guy named Josh Angrist, who I watched his free videos from MIT. He won the Nobel Prize in economics. And I emailed him and he ended up writing back. And I said, what about this? And so we built a rapport. And it's great because later on, when I got accepted to MIT as the first formerly incarcerated like MBA, I guess he messaged the dean like, "Oh man, I love Daniel. He's great." And he was like, "How do you know Josh?" Right? And so I end up pitching these papers. Eventually, it starts getting picked up, right? So my working papers that I'm writing get picked up like the Trinity College in Dublin, then in Japan, then in Singapore, then in Romania. And I would go to these conferences and like they would accept me because you submit it blind. Then it gets approved. And once it's approved, they'll be like, okay, what university you represent? What do you teach? And I'd be like, I don't teach. They're like, well, where'd you go to school? I didn't go to school. And they were like blown away. The time I didn't realize that was not normal because I just didn't know. I was like, oh, these are all these people who find this interesting.
No, but isn't that interesting? Like when you take social norms where you feel it is normal, it sometimes make you not want to do it. When you don't think about it.
Yeah.
Like we put our own boundaries on ourselves, unfortunately, right?
Yes, 100%. And so next thing you know, it starts taking off. And then eventually I get hit up by someone at the World Economic Forum. Hey, man, we read your research. This is awesome. Would you like to do something with the forum? And I'm like, yeah. And then literally like a week later, I get hit up by Harvard Business Review, right? So it's like, and as that's happening, one of my friends and mentors is like, yo, man, have you ever thought of like going back to school to like get some formal education? And I said, yeah, man, but I'm a little too old to do an undergrad. He goes, skip undergrad, just go straight through a master's. I'm like, is that possible? And they're like, yeah, who knows? Like you should try. And this was Gunther from the World Bank. And so he had gone to London School of Economics. And at this point, so now it's like 2019, right? 2019, 2020. As I started exploring it in like 2017, I built my first VC deck. So you know how they have like a vision board? So I built my first deck, my dream fund of what I'm going to be. And so I knew for sure, like, hey, one day I'm going to run a venture fund and I'm going to invest across core, infrastructure. And so when I was looking at schools to go to a master's, Gunther had gone to London School of Economics. And also the highest percentage of employees at Goldman Sachs was from London School of Economics. So again, I'm like, yo, man, I want to put myself in the middle of the pack and I want those. And so that's why I chose that. So I'm like, yo, I'm going to apply. I actually couldn't apply. Like there was a process with the form. If you didn't have the material, you couldn't go to the next thing. So I end up sending an email. They're like, yo, man, it's against school policy. I'm like, well, how do I change it? They're like, the only thing we can think of is you got to get a department head or somebody, a chair, to like vouch and like kind of pitch on their behalf. So I hit up like every single department chair in like econ, international relations, and every single one of them said get lost. They were like, no. And I was super nice because I was like, I know I'm going to find one. So I got to make sure I'm really nice to these people throughout the process because we're going to be colleagues. And so they all said no, but now I figured out that I had to get the Board of Regents approval, right? And so I hit up the dean of admissions and the provost or whatever, and I read a really long thing. I said, hey, my name's Daniel. This is my story. Here's some of my published links. Here's my background. I'm trying to do a master's. Now, I know it's against policy, and I don't want to cause any problems. I want to figure out what's the process to petition the board and get 5 minutes with them to plead my case. Like nowadays, you can work at Google or Goldman as a software developer. You don't need an undergrad thing.
Right.
And it's like, and so I did this and I said, hey, the world's changing. When I got my first felony, there was no criminal justice movement. That word didn't even exist, right? There was no second chance hiring. And so I said, like, hey, I think I've worked hard. How do I figure this out? And I have to say, she wrote me back the next day and said, hey, thank you for the very thoughtful letter. I have the ability to override that, and I would be honored for you to apply, and you could be our first.
It was your Rudy moment. Your
Rudy
Rudiger, right?
Yeah.
He didn't give up. He kept going.
Dude, I kept going. And it's weird because like even now I always joke, man. I'm like, someday, I hope to be very, very wealthy. And I expect I'll do a lot more giving and stuff to LSE because they really opened the door for me. And so I end up applying the next day, and within 24 hours, I get an unconditional offer. Now, this is where it gets fun too, right? So that was a 2-year program. So I'm going through it, and I love it, right? And there are some 1-year master's programs. So my second year, I'm like, yo, I'm going to do a second master's. So I asked LSE, I said, can I do a second master's at the same time? They're like, absolutely not. We already met the rules for you. No. So I said, okay, no worries. So I end up applying to University College London to do a second master's there. And I get accepted. But I didn't realize that your visa is connected to the school and the home office. So it sent out flags to both of them. So LSE hits me up. They said, what are you doing? You're going to UCL. I said, well, yeah, I wanted to do a second and you wouldn't let me. They're like, well, it's against policy. We can't. I'm like, so if I'm here at LSE on Monday and Tuesday and I'm at UCLA on Thursday and Friday, like who cares, right? As long as I'm getting good grades. And so LSE says, well, if we give you dispensation to do the second one here, will you do it here rather than UCL? So I said, sure. So I ended up doing 2 masters at LSE. And they actually never figured out how to merge my student numbers. So I had 2 separate student numbers,
oh, wow.
2 separate things. And I'm in the alumni base twice.
Forging new ground, my man. That's what you do.
Yeah. And so I did that. And then as I'm doing it now I started working at different VC firms along the way. And I had actually talked to this guy named Sir Julian Legrand, this real famous economist at LSE. He got knighted, right? And I'm like, what do you think, man? Like, this is awesome. Like, I want to stay in. And he goes, I was like, should I do a PhD or something? And he goes, man, as much as I'd love to do a PhD with you because I'd supervise you here, like, like you're a practitioner. You don't want to do this. Like, he's like, if you want more schooling, I would say like an executive MBA or something like that. And he's like, you should look into that. And so I looked into that and ended up, speaking to a few different ones. And it came down to a decision between Booth and MIT. And I chose MIT. And so I got a dean's fellowship there. And I finish up there now in May.
Unbelievable.
Yeah.
I'm like, I got chills. I just love this. We were chatting before, and I say this in my podcast a lot, and I had him on the show. Rudy, like the comeback story is just the most exciting, fun. And I still feel, I always say, I still feel like I'm an underdog today, every day. I just can't help it.
Yeah.
I want to feel that because it keeps me going. What a cool thing. So, all right. So now you're going to graduate. Now you're in VC world and
Yeah.
you have this venture firm. What's your focus? Like you had so much experience in
Yeah.
other things. Where are you going to take this venture?
Yeah. So now my focus is, and I kind of mentioned earlier, Rockyard Ventures. And so it's really kind of carrying on what my dad did, and I say my dad, but really my dad and my mom, right? Because it's like my mom ran the book. She was down there every day and just doing things where it's like he ran a lumber yard and a building here. So I grew up in those sectors, right? Like I worked for contractors growing up. I've worked at 3 different lumber yards. And so I think sometimes we solve for what we know, right? And so I have a huge admiration for those sectors. Think real estate, construction, supply chain, logistics, manufacturing, core industries, blue collar sectors, however you want to call it. And so as I kind of got into the investment thesis, the place that I always wanted to go was that. And I think with my life and my experience and my relationships, being able to kind of like walk a job site and like have the workers look at me and they're like, yo, that's one of us, or walk a port or a waste yard or a recycling plant, and like, yo, Dart's one of us, right? And then also be able to walk at MIT and they're like, yo, he's one of us. And like,
But
I'm
you're
like,
also, but in my mind, you're also going into what's necessary. Like we
yeah,
need to rebuild our infrastructure. We need to rebuild, and with technology and innovation,
yeah,
it's sort of a smart place to be. And thank God you have it as roots, right? Because
yeah,
you still want to be involved in things that you like, right, and that
yeah.
you identify with.
I think for VC, the way I always say it, it's like I think to be an amazing long-term venture capitalist, you have to absolutely love the space you're investing in.
Yes.
Because so much, it's really like a research job. Like if you're not obsessed with it to some point, it's just
Well, there's a
not.
lot of rejection, problems,
Yeah,
issues, making wrong decisions, pivoting.
yeah,
But guess what? If there's anyone that
yeah,
I know that is going to be prepared
yeah,
for those trials and tribulations and actually have a good
yeah,
frame of mind for the founders you're going to work with,
yeah,
the people that will be involved in that ecosystem, the newer, younger people that need a mentor and
yeah,
need that person we discussed at the beginning saying, you can do this, you
yeah,
got this.
yeah,
It's going to be you.
yeah. No, I agree, man. I love it, and I think it's weird because I built that first deck, what, 7, 8 years ago now. But I finally feel like it's like most of my life has been working to kind of get to this point. And
That's
I feel like now I'm like right where I need to be.
that's amazing.
Um, I just love it. I say it all the time. I just love it. Talking to founders, working in the spaces, it's just amazing. There's nothing in the world I'd
And
rather.
you've raised $10 million to date.
So we raised. I did my first close. So I haven't raised all of it, but I did my first close. I started deploying, and yeah, we're backed by Gary Cohn is one of our backers, which is
So
unreal.
good.
Dude, it's crazy, bro. You know, I'm like sometimes like it's it's weird because like for him, it may not even register. Like if he was to write a memoir, I don't know if this was registered. But for me, it's like, again, it's like this huge crucible moment, right? Like here I am and like growing up, like Goldman Sachs was like the beacon on the hill. It was like the most prestigious thing in the world. It was like, and it still is. It's like, yo, man, that's like the promised land. And now a president of that and like someone who's a cabinet member of the White House is like doing that. And not only to do that, but he like went and did press for me. He like gave a
Well,
quote.
dude, he believes in you. I mean, like I've gotten to know you. Like he believes in you, and good
So,
for. And why not? You're gonna do really well.
yeah,
You
I'm just
you
blessed.
worked hard to get here.
Yeah, it's just like sometimes I'm just like, and then so I'm still involved in a lot of like what I'd say is like mission driven, purpose driven stuff. The thing I work right now, again, the most on is economic mobility. But I have a conference that I put on that at MIT on second chance hiring. I got the CEO of Kroger to come speak. I got the CEO of Kelly Services, the president of Union Pacific. President of Union Pacific, right? $150 billion company. I sent a cold email to their general contact form, right? 2 days later, I get a message from like their PR team, like, hey, this looks interesting. What is it? And that's what I always say. Like,
But what I think you're going to make people aware of, hopefully, is that there's so many good people out there that really want to help as much as they can. And when you're presenting them with a good opportunity, the second chance hiring, they run to it, right? It just shows how people are good. People are innately good and they want to help. And you're giving them a beautiful vehicle.
People are innately good.
Right?
Yeah, people are innately good. And another thing that I say on the people are innately good is on the counter side of that, I always tell people who are rebuilding their lives, like, think about it like in different terms. And what I say is, like, if you want to be an amazing doctor, it's going to take 10 to 15 years. It doesn't happen overnight. You want to be an amazing lawyer? 10 to 15 years. If you want to rebuild your life and do something amazing, don't be bummed if it takes 10 to 15 years, right? So it's like, I got out, I will have been out 10 years this September. And so, like, the way I see it is like, hey, man, when I first got in prison, I was changing sheets of Airbnbs. You're looking at me 10 years later. And so I tell the younger guys and the younger women, hey, man, it takes a minute, but that's normal, right? This immediate gratification isn't how it works. And so think about it in terms of like, hey, if I want to be a heart surgeon specialist, it took me 15 years. And so I always try to say that, set the expectations. Like, yo, but I'll tell you what, if you do it right, the journey, man, is so much fun.
Well, that's just the best commercial for the theme of my podcast, The Myth of Overnight Success. Like, all I have to do is play that now before I ask anybody to come on. That it's amazing. Well, how can people learn more about Rock Yard Ventures?
Yeah.
Like, because that's what you're doing now.
Yeah.
And how can they do that for the audience to learn more about?
Yeah. So, I'd love to meet anybody interested in the space, and the easiest way to get a hold of me is there's a contact form on the website, Rock Yard Ventures, or LinkedIn. Just hit me up, Daniel Dart. But yeah, I mean, let's change the world, man.
Yeah, and even with your campaigns, right? You never know. Someone might. I mean, you become an expert at launching those, and other people may have other things they want to get messaging out. So at least you can guide them, right?
Yeah, absolutely, 100%.
All right. Well, thank you so much.
Yeah,
I'm smiling. I'm going to probably be smiling all day. I'm so happy we were able to do this, and I really appreciate it.
Dude, thank you so much for the time. Have a wonderful day, and I will talk to you soon.
Hi, John Schultz here. Thank you so much for tuning into this week's episode. Would really appreciate it if you would like, comment, subscribe, and share with your friends. Looking forward to being with you soon.